Good morning in the United States, good afternoon, and good evening in Europe. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have our latest virtual seminar on Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, and we have a terrific panel with us today. We have General Wesley Clark, former U.S. Commander, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. We have Ilya Ponomarenko, one of the most enterprising Ukrainian journalists who is at the front all the time. We have Andriy Zaharanyuk, a former defense minister of Ukraine, who also has been very, very active as Russia wages total war on Ukraine. We have Dr. Hannah Shelest, one of the sharpest analysts, geopolitical analysts in Ukraine, who also has been quite active, especially since February 24, when Moscow launched its major offensive. And we will have joining us a special guest in about 15 or 20 minutes, Congressman Costa, who with General Clark and me was in Kyiv last week. So we will start with Ilya Ponomarenko. Ukraine made stunning progress over the past couple of weeks. They took key logistical and rail sites in northeastern Ukraine. What's next, and should we expect it to be as easy as it was last week and the week before?
Yeah, thank you. I actually just got back from those sites from newly liberated territories of Kharkiv Oblast, and I saw those actual roads along which the Ukrainian military was moving to crush the Russian front in there. So, it's a very hard question to answer because I'm not sure what about you, ladies and gentlemen, but I think we have little to no understanding of available Ukrainian offensive capability right now, and also the reserves to get this running on and on and on and on. So it's a very big question how much power we have. We still have to go on. I think what happens in the nearest perspective, like next week, is the Ukrainian military trying to consolidate their gains in Kharkiv and also other territories, try to give some rest to the troops and trying to pump up more reserves for this. So it's again an open question: how much do we have right now? Is Ukrainian military capable of, for instance, continuing this Kharkiv drive across the Oskil River and enter the Luhansk Oblast and attack Svatov, for instance, which is like super important Russian logistical and also power hub, or whether it could be attack on Melitopol, the success of which would simply get the Russian presence in the south just cut by halves? Or would it be something even greater in Kherson? But I suspect this the least probable area. So I think we're going to be safe to say that Ukraine is definitely determined to keep the progress going. There's something that has switched this war in Ukraine's favor. And we're going to see Kherson still contested, heavy fighting there. But I think Ukrainian military would be looking for another weak spot in the Russian front line all along the country, just because we know it that Russians find themselves struggling to have enough manpower for such a huge front line. So they have to rebalance, redeploy forces to substitute for their weak parts and create new weak sectors. So I think the Ukrainian military will be looking for those weak spots and strike where the enemy expects less.
Thank you very much.
We'll see.
General Clark, how do you assess Ukraine's counteroffensive and can it keep going? And what weapons does Kyiv need from the U.S. to take back the territory Moscow has seized since 2014?
I think the counteroffensive has been very well handled. It's a two-pronged counteroffensive, one in the south, which is going up against strong enemy forces. It's a decisive area. It's very important politically for Ukraine to regain this area around Kherson and take the oblast, and especially the area on the right bank of the Dnieper. This is a reconnaissance-led attack, and so it's important that Ukraine not expend its forces too soon. It's a matter of finding the targets, bringing in fires, destroying those targets, and moving forward step by step, at the same time going at the logistics base across the river. In the north, the Ukraine forces have been very effective at taking advantage of Russia's thinning out its defenses in the north. Here, the question is, how far can Ukrainian forces go without outrunning their supplies and just exhausting themselves and opening themselves up to a counterattack? Overall, what's got to happen is more supplies, more drones. We need the Switchblade drones. We need the ATACMS, long-range missiles. We need more 155 ammunition. And especially, we've got to be strengthening the maintenance support, what we call the tail of the logistics forces, so they can sustain themselves in this kind of an offensive operation. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Andriy, will Ukraine consolidate the gains it's made over the past week or so? And what are the chances of a Russian counterstrike as Ukraine, again, extends its supply lines? Also, I'd appreciate your thoughts, too, on the weapons needed for the future Ukrainian success with an offensive.
Ukraine will certainly consolidate the gains because we simply have to return the territories under the rightful control, over the rule of law in back at home. And this process is happening at the moment. And of course, we uncover lots of truths about the Russian occupation again. But this process obviously is unstoppable, and they will reintegrate very quickly, and people will return to the normal life. Military, of course, will establish a firm presence there, and to minimize the chances of any potential another offensive and so on. Question is whether we think that Russians will try to gain back those territories, or at least to do some attack at the other ones, but particularly in the east. I think yes, I believe with 100% probability. So the only issue for Russians is that they cannot achieve much, and basically they do whatever they can. And if they don't do something, it's not because they don't want; it's because they cannot. And right now we clearly see Russians already on some brink of their capabilities. They have trouble with additional troops. They have trouble with recruitment. They have trouble with the equipment. So they will go through some difficult times, but they will concentrate on one or two operational directions, and we will face their attempts of the revenge, so to speak. Regarding the equipment and weapons, I fully agree with General Clark. Of course, I would add tanks, because I think that we already need to think about that type of weapons coming to Ukraine more. And I would say that obviously sustainment would be a massive, probably the most important challenge for the winter period, because we have a huge number of various weapons of different makes and models, and this is about the time when they start to break if we don't maintain them. So actually keeping them in the right order would be extremely crucial. The rest of the equipment is the same. It's a long-range firepower, so artillery, multiple rocket launchers, and that sort of type. Drones, striking drones, and so on. So nothing changed. The overall approach of our armed forces to the offensive, to the counteroffensive, is exactly the same. Thank you.
Andriy, thank you. But you said something about Russia using, additional weapons or additional capabilities as required by the situation. So I'm going to ask you a specific question. There has been speculation that Moscow has, quote unquote, not unleashed its cyber capabilities against Ukraine. I am skeptical of that, but I'd appreciate your take.
Well, I'm not being a cyber expert. I have few of the colleagues who work in this field. They work night and day. We have attacks on a pretty much permanent basis. And if somebody says that they not unleashed their full capability, may I ask why? Because there is no reason to that decision, really, because they tried to down us many times. They do everything possible in order to destroy Ukraine. They already pretty nervous that they're not succeeding. So why on earth they would be holding themselves back? I don't see a reason for that. Thank you.
I tend to agree. Hannah, I will come to you with a different question, but I'd also appreciate your take on the cyber question.
We haven't heard a lot about the cyber within these 6 months, but it doesn't mean that we didn't have any problems with it, because the cyber being just a classical way of the warfare for the Russian Federation since 2014. And we know that just before this full-fledged aggression in January and February, we had the multiply times attacks against the different structures in Ukraine. However, it seems to me because cybersecurity was one of the priorities within the last 8 years, as for now, that is the least successful sphere for the Russian Federation. However, we understand that they have sufficient capabilities to inject, let's say, these type of the operations as well, not only the information sphere where they're working pretty well, but also cyber, let's say, at least against the electrical system. That's what we definitely can expect, because we see that the critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure before the winter is becoming one of their priorities.
Thank you. Okay, a different question for you, Hannah. What has been the impact on Ukrainian society and also the Ukrainian political class of Ukraine's recent military success?
You know, definitely on the one hand, you hear euphoria both from the politicians and from the population, because there is the feeling of victory. That is the feeling that you can retake back, that your armed forces are capable for something, not only for defense, but also to get forward. So you have a lot of the feelings, a lot of the statements like, let's go further. But that is quite a dangerous feeling at the same time. That's why you hear the second part of the society who are saying, like, please be cautious, please don't be too much euphoric, because you can make mistakes. When you don't understand that you need to settle at the certain territory, to control this territory, not only to regain, you can have your losses and mistakes. So here is definitely, on the one hand, you hear the statements that asking and pushing the political class, the military, to go forward. But at the same time, you already hear more sober voices who are saying that, please be careful. Our forces are also getting tired. They also need a little bit of rest after the big battles. We also need to establish the efficient control of the territories that we liberated before going further. We may not have sufficient amount of weapons. So that's why these two voices both are very strong. And now it is important to understand which of them will prevail.
I very much like that answer, because when I was in Kyiv last week for 4 days, it seemed to me that both the leaderships of the country, as well as people in the streets, while exulting in the victory, were also very cautious to say, let's not be overly enthusiastic. Let's understand this may not be the turning of the tide. Let's be cautious. I think that's probably the right approach. Okay, Ilya, President Zelensky and other Ukrainian leaders have been careful not to declare the counteroffensive a turning point in the war. If the U.S. does not provide Ukraine the advanced weapons it is properly requesting, the weapons that General Clark and then Andriy referred to, it might take Ukraine years to win this war. Is Ukrainian society ready for a long war?
Well, I tend to give a positive answer, just because, we all study public opinion. And I mean, the latest poll that I saw, it says that 91% of Ukrainians trust the country's armed forces. And I think 92% of the Ukrainian population trusts the country's leadership. So I think that's an indication. And besides, what we have seen over the last, let's say, even a couple of weeks is definitely a success. It starts going, and it boosts morale, what's going on. And the Ukrainians have always been assured about the armed forces, assured about the country's defense. The morale, I think, from the very beginning, the morale was pretty high, very high. And the Russian missile terror campaign is not really working. I'm not seeing that. So I think in the tendency where we keep having not strategic but smaller victories that pump up our morale and the trust of the armed forces, I think the answer is definitely yes, because we have seen this balance between people absolutely rejoicing, but at the same time having more moderate voices saying that it's not that rosy and rainbow colored. So I think yes. And what's good behind this is that the presidential administration, the military, they have stuck to this policy of not providing too bright expectation about Kherson. So we have already seen the military saying that do not expect something bright and fast and glorious. It's going to be hard. It's going to be complicated and then bloody. So do not expect fast results. So I think that was the right approach in this regard. So it's better to go this way rather than promise people associated and bright expectations in this regard. So I think that in this regard, we're doing fine. We're doing okay. That's just my expectation, but I see my people understanding that the war is going on. That is going to continue next year, but still, everybody expects next year to be a year of Ukrainian success in this war. So we'll see.
Thank you. Okay. Wes, the administration, the Biden administration, trots out regularly the excuse that Putin is threatening nuclear war to explain why it refuses to provide Ukraine the weapons it needs to defeat Moscow more easily. How do you view the whole question of escalation?
Well, I think it would be a terrible thing if World War III broke out and we had nuclear winter and mankind was destroyed. But I don't see that as a single, snap of the finger. The actual truth is, John, we practiced and we looked at during the Cold War when the United States had these tactical nuclear weapons, and they're not terribly decisive on the battlefield, but they will certainly infuriate world opinion and mobilize more support for Ukraine if they're used. Now, honestly, when we looked at it, and we tried this several times in exercises during the Cold War period, they were disappointing in use. You have to find the target. The weapon's not big. If it lands on you, you're dead, and there's no remnant. But it's a 300, 500 meter spot. Other people start dying of radiation. It's not like boom, it's a death ray and everything's wiped out. It doesn't happen that way. So it's mostly a shock effect. What we have to be clear is that we're fighting not just for Ukraine. Ukraine is carrying the burden of the entire post-Cold War system that was established of the rule of law. That's all been put on these 40 million people in Ukraine. And so the fact that Putin is threatening use of nuclear weapons, if the United States buckles under that threat, chaos will ensue. We should be doing everything we can to support the people of Ukraine. And we should understand that, of course, Putin's going to threaten, but Ukraine's not going to quit, and neither should we.
Okay, thank you very much, Wes. I see we've been joined by Congressman Jim Costa. Congressman Costa was in Ukraine with Wes and me last week, so he's coming fresh from the front, so to speak. So, Congressman, it's over to you to make a few comments, and then we'll come back to you for some questions after you make an initial statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and I'm honored to be a part of this panel. General, it's good to see you again, and for these others that are part of this, let me tell you, I think, and three of us were there at the actually it was a week ago today in Kyiv, and spent, I think, a terrific 48 hours interacting with our counterparts with the Ukrainian government at all levels, along with our counterparts in Europe. And this is the test of our time. I can't agree with General Clark any more, but except to underline the fact that Putin is a direct threat to democratic nations around the world. And he has proven that time and time again. You can go back to 2008 in Georgia. You can look at the situation in Syria with Aleppo. You can look at 2014 in Crimea. And at each time, he has been able to get away with his aggressive behavior. And we have to say stop. And the brave Ukrainian people are standing up for democracies around the world. And they're facing the horrific losses that they have now for over 200 days. We have done, I think, a good job, but we have to do more to provide the support for Ukraine, not only from a military standpoint, but also as well as from a financial and humanitarian effort. Going to Busha, as we did a week ago today, and seeing the mass grave where 166 people were buried. Now we're learning here in the result of the last week, another mass grave of over 440 individuals. It could not be clearer that we have been able to come together in ways that Putin could never have imagined. And certainly, I think his comments yesterday with President Xi reflected the fact that things aren't going so well. But the fact is that I told my colleagues this week coming back from Kyiv that now is not the time to relax. Now is the time to understand the urgency of continuing the efforts that we've made thus far, so that we can get Ukraine to a place where they have the view that they can have the advantages and the leverage to reach a satisfactory negotiated peace. But they have to be in a place where they feel comfortable to have those negotiations, and we can bring this to hopefully a close sooner than later.
Congressman, thank you very much for those comments. Let me ask you one quick question. You pointed out, Ukraine's had some success. Now is the time for us to really go in and help them more. We've provided substantial amount of assistance, military and economic. There are some complaints about this, including in Congress. Are you confident we'll be able to continue sending the economic and military aid Ukraine needs, additional economic and military aid, late this year, next year?
Yes, I am in the near term. And I expressed that to you and to Wes and others last week. Nothing, as we all know, breeds success like more success. And clearly it was inferred by those of us who were there last weekend that this counteroffensive was taking place, and they had outlined a good strategy, working with ourselves and the British to employ it. And we see the initial results of that. But now we need to continue that effort. The administration has proposed a package that I think we need to expedite. Clearly, from a military standpoint, and I'll let the general respond, but what we've done in the last 2-3 months, only the American military could do in terms of moving as we have. But clearly, this next package is critical, and we need to follow up with that. Politically, I think the support is still there in the Congress at this point in time, and I believe it will be for the next 6 months. I can't make any predictions into the next year, which is why the urgency is so critical now, I believe.
Thank you very much. Okay, Andriy, back to you. You recently predicted that Ukraine will win full stop at the Yes conference last week, where Congressman and General Clark were. Why do you think so?
Well, first of all, because there is no room for any other solution. Ukraine is clearly not going to go for any compromises with Russia, simply because these compromises will not bring any peace. They will reinforce, if hypothetically they take place, they reinforce Russian behavior. It would be extremely difficult for people to accept any. It would be extremely difficult for politicians even to offer any. And then, honestly, there is no understanding like how legitimate compromise can actually look like in this situation after so many crimes been committed and so on. So I think this is off the table completely. And we already passed that point some long time ago, actually. So then the question is, somebody needs to win, and it's either us or Russians. Obviously, they are interested in delaying that war, in moving this into a war of attrition, war of exhaustion, and whatever, so that it takes time, so they can actually recover. What we're interested in pushing them as soon as possible out of our territory without giving them a chance to rest. And so far, this is happening. As we see right now, they're struggling with hiring people. They have substantial issues with the quality of the personnel which they're bringing and manpower which they bring. They have severe logistic issues again. And as we could see again last week, it was like massive problems with motivation, which I believe they will only get worse after the events of the last week. So combining these all together, I don't think they have a chance to win. And if that's the case, then we have a chance to win, and we need to use that chance. And what we need to do is when I'm saying we, means like a whole democratic coalition, needs actually to stop being afraid of winning, because a lot of the politicians around the world which I spoke to and analysts and so on, it's very difficult for them to develop that idea of Ukraine winning and Russia losing completely. And that's something which we need to overcome, because this is, first of all, that's what's going to happen. And secondly, we need to become kind of get used to this idea that Russia will be humiliated, Russia will get defeated, and there is no other way.
Thank you. Okay, we will pursue this thread a little bit. Hannah, Ukraine is reporting about the mass graves that have been found in Izum, and Congressman Costa referred to that. At least 440 bodies have been uncovered, most of them civilians, according to reports. What impact have Russian war crimes had on Ukrainian attitudes towards the war and towards Western proposals? This picks up what Andrei was saying, that Ukraine's surrender territory to Moscow in a negotiated peace.
You know, after Irpin and Bucha, we thought that nothing can shock us. And it appears that after each liberated territory, we see more and more shock, more and more war crimes. And definitely that is something you cannot use. You cannot use as the expert, you cannot use as a journalist, you cannot use as the just the regular citizen who understand and watch what is happening there. The problem is that when for us, that is the symbol and additional motivation why we need to liberate the territories on the east, on the north, on the south, because we understand that in Kherson region, we will see the same pictures. It became a pattern. Bucha and Irpin was not the accident exception. It is unfortunately already the pattern of behavior. So still talking with many of my Western colleagues, I don't hear this understanding that we need to refer to Russia as the rapist, as the serial killer. And I still hear the phrases about let's allow them to save the face. So in Ukraine, definitely with each new evidences, new videos, new facts like Izum, we hear less and less readiness for accommodation of the Russian wishes or desire for the negotiations as the talks about talks. We want negotiations only to get rid of the Russian forces out. That's the only variant when we can speak, not to address any of the ultimatums that we heard from Moscow. Another question is that definitely we need to make it public, and also we need to count down sometimes the range that is coming from the military, for example. And I know that in many units, people are talking with the soldiers. So not to go for the revenge, that would be the same violence. You understand this moral. When the soldiers are seeing it by their own eyes, it is becoming more and more difficult for them not to be with the high emotions. And now we need to understand that Ukrainians are not the same as the Russian forces. We will not allow the same crimes to happen against the Russian soldiers. And as for now, it seems to me that we saw the pictures of, for example, the behavior of the soldiers with the prisoners of war that being captured, and these balance being secured. And we see that it is not the lynch actions against them.
Hannah, I know you've been very active in promoting Ukraine's interest during the war in dialogue with Europeans and of course Americans. For those you've been in touch with who argue for some Ukrainian compromise, what has been the impact again of these uncovered Russian war crimes? Does this make them a little bit more hesitant to suggest Ukraine has to make territorial concessions?
You know what is interesting, that I saw the shift in the perceptions in February, March. So just with a full-fledged aggression. At that time, for example, some of the German colleagues stopped talking about the neutral status for Ukraine, for example, but started to speak about the war and understanding what Russia really wants. But the war crimes didn't have the same effect. And that's really shocked me. That still I heard a lot of the proposals, and why it is happening, it's still not understandable for me. Probably that is the fear to accept the reality on the ground. It is the fear to perceive that Russians can behave like this. Each time, a lot of the Western politicians are trying to explain it, to find the explanations why Russians behaved like this. And that is really shocking. And it seems to me that that is the sphere where we need to work more. But what shocks me even more, you know, like with Western, in terms of the European Union, in terms of the US, it's still possible to speak with the arguments. And the more facts you are giving, the more doubts it is bringing to their minds. But now I'm talking more and more with the Middle Eastern, with the African, with the Latin American. And over there, we expected that these people should understand better what does mean war, especially those from the countries who experienced these certain conflicts within the last 30 years. But unfortunately, over there, we have much less understanding of these war crimes, of the danger of these war crimes, of the level of these war crimes and how they're changing situation on the ground than with our European and American colleagues.
Thank you. Congressman Costa, what has been the impact in Congress of the war crimes? Is it strengthening support for Ukraine, would you say, or it has not had much of an impact?
I believe it's increased the support for our participation and support for Ukraine. I think that members of Congress are aghast to see that not only the initial mass graves in Bucha, but now seeing what is a continuing pattern. And I believe, we just came back into session this week. We're supposed to complete our efforts here by the end of the month, but it's my hope that in a continuing resolution or in a must-pass piece of legislation that will provide additional motivation just to do the right thing. And clearly, the world has changed since February 24th, and I think we need to understand that and grasp this horrific war of aggression by Putin as an opportunity, finally, to come together in solidarity as democracies that stand for the rule of law, human rights, and the freedoms that we all cherish. After all, that's really what this is all about. Gazmarov, as I know General Clark knows, back in 2013, made a statement about that democracies were weak and that they would be able to use the freedoms that we enjoy to basically destroy our democratic ways of life. And they've done that. We saw just recently $300 million that Putin has spent on trying to counter our democratic elections. And clearly this is the threat that Putin sees now. And he's made a bet, a gamble, and we need to, make sure that this fails, his efforts.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, General Clark, you had experience not just on the military side in the Balkans when you were the SACEUR, but also as the negotiations proceeded to end the various Balkan wars. What do you see as the role of negotiations here?
I think it's John, I think it's very important that a diplomatic channel be established right now, building on the momentum of the military achievements that Ukraine has made. And we should use the military leverage to get an appropriate settlement that ends this conflict. Now, in doing so, we've got to recognize the role of the United States. So we should be proposing this settlement. In the case of the Kosovo campaign, because we were also bombing, we actually had the Finnish president and the Russian vice president carry it in to Slobodan Milosevic. So we didn't do it ourselves. In the case of the Bosnia, we actually carried it in and did the negotiations. But the point is to have the outlines of the settlement that's acceptable. And those outlines should be all Russian forces out of Ukraine, all missing people accounted for, war crimes reparation, war crimes and reparations. So those four elements, and then we'll get into the security guarantees and so forth. But Russian forces have to leave. And then the counterpart of this is you develop this, and then you understand we must provide Ukraine the weapon systems and the support to force the Russians to leave if they don't voluntarily leave. This is the only acceptable outcome.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate our panelists for speaking with brevity. So we now have lots of time for our audience questions. And I'll start with one from Harlan Ullman. And it's actually directed to General Clark, but Andre, you may also have a word on this. So Wes, the question is this: if you were in command of Ukrainian military forces and understanding as you do both sides, what would be your assessment of the maximally obtainable and minimally acceptable objectives for Kyiv? And what would be your plan for achieving both? What do you need and how quickly that the US is likely to send what you need in terms of weapons, logistics, training, C4, plus other intel and the rest? And what would you expect Putin's response to be? Quite a large question, but I'll give you a first shot at it and then we'll turn to Andre.
Okay, in the near term, artillery, including the ATACMS, but we've got to establish the logistics tail so Ukraine can sustain its fight. At the same time, we've got to transition the mechanized forces, especially the tanks, to NATO standard. And so this requires a 4 or 5 month training process. We've got the surplus equipment, we could give it to them, but it won't work without the logistics behind it. So this is echelon repair parts, it's a repair parts system, it's training mechanics, etc. And that's what's required. Now, we've got to do this urgently because we want this done in this calendar year. We want it done before Putin can mobilize, bring another 100,000, 200,000 people forward and prolong this. This is an incredible pain on the Ukrainian people. It needs to be finished. Russia's forces will put up resistance. They will fight, but a strong show of force by Ukraine, backed by the West, is what's required to complete the demoralization of the Russian forces in the north and provide the wherewithal to push them out of the south, including as far in Crimea as we could get.
Thank you. Andre, your comments?
I would like to make a couple, because this is extremely broad topic, but generally speaking, we need to realize that if this war was started by people, it will be completed as a technology war. So whoever has better technology would have a chance to have an advantage on the battlefield. And we need to make sure that Ukraine has far prevailing technology than Russia. Russian technological process and development is stumbling. Luckily, because of the sanctions, they cannot build more of these high precision weapons. And that's exactly where Ukraine needs to advance. So like, as you could see, the HIMARS, a very popular weapon for the reason, because it's very effective and it's very precise. So we need more of those. We need to create a Ukrainian army as the highly technological one, and then Russia has no chance. And whatever they would do, they simply will not have a chance. But I don't believe that it's going to happen soon. There needs to be political decisions and military decisions made, and I agree, this year. So we don't stop. We never should agree on the frozen conflict or kind of a strategic pause or whatever, because Russia will use it to regain the forces, to replenish stocks, and to recover the manpower. But at the same time, we just need to be realistic. This is not something which we can accomplish within a few months. So it will take time. Thank you.
Congressman Costa, I'm going to rely on your goodwill and give you a tough question from Dana Bort. The question is this: given the horrific nature of this war and what the Russians have done in occupied territories, why does the U.S. still refuse to send the long-range weapons Ukraine needs to end the war faster?
Well, there is a debate here in Congress, and certainly within the administration, my sense is how you modulate the efforts. And as I said last week, part of the lessons to be learned, I think, in this whole war of aggression is over expectations and under expectations. Certainly Putin had over expectations of what he could produce in the short term, and under expectations of what Ukraine could do to stand for their own sovereignty. But those over and under expectations just didn't exist with Putin, with our Western allies. And General Clark knows this very well. In January and February, we had all had reports, classified reports as to what we could expect. Clearly, what we've learned, from my perspective, is that Putin's big investment over the last 20 years in his military is really a Potemkin village of sorts. What we discounted was the fact that their command and control system is still remnants of a 20th century military. Their ability to implement high tech. I mean, they're right at the border. Their country is of Ukraine. They still haven't figured out a supply chain effort to reinforce their troops, and the corruption that clearly exists within this military, coupled with conscripts that don't know what the hell they're doing there, and are being urged to steal whatever they can in every village they're at because they don't have a refrigerator or they don't have a TV or whatever, has become very clear. And so we overestimated the capability of Putin's military, and there are lessons to be learned there. If you're president of the United States, the last thing you want to do is to be responsible for creating World War III. So I understand the president's caution, and I understand the differences of opinion that he's receiving as they try to modulate increased support, military support, to bring this to the successful conclusion that I think General Clark and I and many of us feel is necessary, as he described during the Balkan War as an example. So that difference of opinion within our defense forces, our security forces, that ultimately gets funneled into decision-making in the West Wing is how this is being modulated. And you get a lot of different opinions here in Congress as to how fast or how slow those efforts of support ought to be. I think many of us feel that speed is of the essence, and we must take advantage of the opportunity. And I remember General Clark talking about the winter coming in and the impacts of that. I think we've got a couple-month window here in which to really take advantage of the opportunities that now are at hand.
Okay, thank you. We have a question, and apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name, from Mercia Nanka. And Eli, it's a question for you. Recent polls in Europe show Europeans care mostly about purchasing power and gas bills. What would your messages be to those who may be inclined to expect their governments to first draw prices down and then only then send weapons to Ukraine? And then she says, thank you, or he says, thank you for the answer and for the your incredible bravery and reporting. So kudos to you.
Thank you. We're doing this for you guys. So I don't think that my message would be of something new and incredible. It's just the same principle that is, universal and eternal in this regards. It's not the war that does not concern an average guy in Paris, in Brussels, in London, in Rome. It's about us all. If someone thinks that geographically he or she is far away from the front line of Kharkiv, it's just an illusion, because we are in this together. It is attack against us all. It's not just Ukraine alone. Ukraine is just the first one to sustain the full-fledged war of Russia against the West, the democratic world. So I think it's better now for the people in Europe to go the easiest way while it's still available, and help Ukraine do the thing. Since we're not asking for boots on the ground, we're not asking for Europeans to fight at us. We have our military, we have our armed forces, which have been proved capable, and the recent military victories of Ukraine on the battlefield, they are decisively showing that Ukraine is something that is worth supporting, that the case is worth investing in. So it's better to help Ukraine do the job, get the job done right now with money, with weapons, equipment, rather than taking the easiest way, the deal with the devil, and facing the perspective of facing this this army and this attack on the Western democracy by themselves. So just give us our military weapons, and you'll see why.
Thank you. This is a question from Rusty Allison. Hannah, I'd appreciate if you could take it. And he asked, how do you see the actions in and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? Is this a factor in the war? And is this something Ukraine will be keeping in mind as it continues its counteroffensive?
Yes, surely, because we can consider the whole situation as the fact of nuclear terrorism, let's be honest, because the goal is to bring terror both to the local population, to the Ukrainian government, and to the international community. Because the occupation of the nuclear plant doesn't matter that it is the biggest nuclear plant in Europe. In general, the fact that it is the nuclear plant, it is the same as the threats to use the nuclear weapons. You don't know the results, you don't know the real impact, but at the same time, all those countries still have the pictures of Chernobyl or Fukushima. So that is the perception of the situation in the minds and fears in the minds of any Europeans, because we remember how far the smoke from Chernobyl went 40 years ago. So who said that now the situation will not repeat? That's why, first of all, the bringing of the military to the engines holes, shelling the territories, and not allowing for so many months the international community, international observers to come and to watch what is happening there, definitely demonstrates that the demonstration of the possibility to use the nuclear as the weapon was the most important, not because this particular town of Energodar is so strategically important as the place to keep logistical, for example, or any other ways of communication. That's purely because they could take it, and because as the nuclear terrorism, they see the result, they see the reaction of the international community.
Thank you. All right. Andre, here's one from James Sayer, which I think is for you. What effect will a hard winter have on future military operations?
Well, it certainly will have an effect, but because obviously logistically we need to get ready. We need to get ready for fuel. We need to get ready for the infrastructure facilities, clothing, food, etc. But it will certainly have effect on all sides, and Russians will also have trouble because they are not prepared. We know that they have problems with preparation. Right now, they're collecting donations for the warm clothing, for example, which was kind of interesting, assuming that we didn't expect them to be that sort of short for something for the winter. But so I think there will be some complications. But Ukraine certainly knows about that. I mean, we've been in the war for 8 years, so it's just the size of the war and the size of the force, since it's like close to 1 million. It's obviously a challenge. But we discuss it now. We talk about this now. Today, people already are thinking about the winter, and I sincerely expect our ministry to be ready by that time.
Okay, thank you. Wes, do you want to comment on that?
I think winter weather is going to make it more difficult for armed forces to maneuver. It makes reconnaissance somewhat easier from satellites and from drones because you don't have tree cover. No, I think it's just a condition that has to be dealt with. And I think we in the West have got to help Ukraine prepare to deal with this. There are multiple things, but the Russians also know how to deal with it. They may not be prepared because they don't have the logistics, but everybody's going to scramble for houses to hang on to during this period and warm up in and so forth. That's what really happens is people look for dwelling places. The experience from World War II is that objectives became on the Eastern Front, as we called it, the housing became the objective. And both sides swapped through these houses in Ukraine and Belarus and others as the war surged back and forth because people were freezing. Now, a lot of it depends on how bad the winter is, John.
Okay, thank you. Wes, we talked about with you before about negotiations. We have a question from Lindsay Bedingfield, which I think is also more on this theme. And wouldn't it be best to wait until the Ukrainian armed forces retake all territories, including Crimea, before offering a peace deal? What do you think about that?
Okay, so this for me, right?
Yes, for you.
Okay, you can't wait. What you have to do is you have to have two tracks. You have to push militarily and push diplomatically. That way you end up with an agreement. If you wait and you wait until the military piece is completed, you lose allied support. You have people thinking you're warmongers. It's harder to maintain congressional support. So you got to hold out the hope that this is going to end sooner. And you then use that as the rationale for why you must continue to support Ukraine, because you won't get these results of Russia giving up if you slack off on the support. What we don't want to see is a frozen conflict where people say, oh, look, Ukraine showed its ability now. Let's be cautious now. Let's slow down and let's see what happens. That is a result for failure. We have to insist Russia leave all of Ukraine diplomatically. That's why we've had sanctions on for 8 years on Russia. What sense would it be to say, okay, we got a settlement here, but you can keep Crimea when we've had sanctions on for that very purpose? So we got to go all the way through on this. We have to do it with two tracks. And the best time to start these two tracks is with the momentum militarily that Ukraine has achieved.
Okay.
Ambassador, let me just say,
Please.
I completely agree with General Clark and the clarity of his response. And that really needs to be, I think, the posture and the position of our alliance and work on those two tracks. And we need to make it clear to the entire world, including Putin, that we're all in agreement on this strategy.
Thank you. Okay. We have a question from Yuri Bender, who brings up China, but in a rather narrow context. And Ilya, I'll give it to you. Putin has just met with President Xi in Uzbekistan, and it appears the Chinese leader voices reservations about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What sort of effect will this have, bearing in mind China has plans for significant investment in Ukrainian logistics, agriculture, and technology?
Well, let's see what happens next. But I think right from the start, China was kind of having a position of someone witnessing this and looking what's going next after Putin decides to do this. I mean, in the invasion of Ukraine. So this did not end well, obviously, as we can see it. So China is now in a position to follow the leader, to follow the winner in this regard. So I expect China to be very active in terms of investment, but in the post-war period, probably. I don't know. I'm not insisting on this opinion because in the post-war reconstruction period, we're going to require a lot of investments. There will be a lot of work to do, a lot of contracts to be served and fulfilled, ranging from development, construction, and agriculture technologies, and so on and so forth. So I think China did something that brought it to understanding that in the longer run, Ukraine is the one to go with in this regard. So I expect China to be among top investors in Ukraine, the post-war country.
Okay, thank you. Congressman
Ambassador,
Thompson.
if I can add a very small
Go ahead.
thing about China, because I just edited the article that will be in Ukraine Analytica in a week, exactly about the Chinese position during the war and previously. The question is that everybody looked to the numbers pre-war for the trade, and definitely China was the biggest trade partner with the 15 billion. But in terms of investments, Chinese lost. And they were absolutely just with a small project. And if you see the numbers, they are even not in the top 10 without any strategic investments as we hoped and without real military cooperation after several spy scandals and after Motor Siege scandal. So we came to the war when Chinese had only their own interest. Will Chinese come with investments after the war? That's also the question, because this time Ukraine will need to choose if we want Chinese investments, considering first their political position during the war, and the second is considering European and American position regarding any type of the Chinese involvement.
Thank you. Congressman Costa, on the Chinese question, some opponents of strong support for Ukraine argue that we can't support Ukraine because we don't want to drive Russia into China's arms. This meeting in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, seems to suggest that danger has not really quite worked. Your sense, please, about the China factor in our policy towards Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think that in this sense, and I think it was illustrated yesterday, Russia's a junior partner in this whole effort. And China, I think has been very disappointed in the last 200 days, given everything that's happened. Whatever Putin presented to him back in February when they had their conversation has not come to pass. And we need to understand that China always, as they view the rise of the Middle Kingdom, wants stability. They need stability in world markets for them to continue their path. And China has a lot of internal problems and difficulties. And obviously, their growth is not what they want it to be. Their handling of the pandemic is clearly not met with the same success that we have in the Western world. And, they saw the impacts of sanctions. Nobody thought that the Western world would come together in such a forceful way on these sanctions. And while some of them are having more immediate effect than others, clearly China is watching this very carefully and wary. 1,000 American and European companies now to date have withdrawn from Russia. So I think you look at this in its totality, and China clearly is looking at the post end of this conflict and where they will participate. But I think that even China's military leaders, I believe, and we have our own folks here, are recalculating what such a effort might be in Taiwan, which has been one of the issues that have been raised here. And I think they're recalculating as to what this all might mean. And certainly the Taiwanese are.
Just to underscore that point, are you suggesting that the Western unity events against Russian aggression, sanctions, and the success of Ukraine's military with American arms has cautioned China against a military strike on Taiwan?
Yes. I think there are internal discussions taking place, certainly within Xi's own, leadership group. And there are, I think, differences of opinion within the Chinese military. But clearly, they are not prepared at this point in time to do anything like this. And they're now looking at the downsides potentially. And I wouldn't be surprised if China renews their continued effort on a dual track system that focuses first on the diplomatic efforts.
Okay,
With
thank you very
Taiwan.
much. Our time is up. In fact, we're 1 minute over. I'd like to thank very much our panelists for both a very smart and concise expression of views. And I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in. And we will be doing more on the war in the weeks ahead. Thank you all.
Thank all of you.
You,
Thank you.
John.
Okay.